My name is Gloria, and I have been the only and most beloved child for most of my conscious life. Do you know how great it is to be the only one? This is when all attention is focused only on you, when everything is delicious. Only to you, when you are taken to your grandmother, where you are waiting for goodies, cartoons, new toys, and sometimes pocket money. And everything is done for you. When my parents got married, they worked hard to buy their dream house as soon as possible. The years flew by, and they were all saving up money. Finally, this happy moment had to come. They were able to acquire housing. My mother told me how euphoric they were flying with my father, because having a roof over your head is a fairy tale. Well, then it dawned on them that it was time to have children, and then the problem started. In short, my mother could not get pregnant for a long time, so she was forced to undergo several different courses of treatment together with my father. It is good that they supported each other, did not retreat, and did not fight for happiness. As a result, after a few pounds of medication, my mother was diagnosed with infertility. She and Dad weren't ready for this, although it's unlikely that anyone will be ready for this at all. Their hands dropped, my father began to drink, my mother closed in on herself. It was as if their home had become a storehouse of grief and tears, rather than the happy moments they had planned. And then, when their marriage almost broke up, my mother's mother came and threw up the idea to adopt a baby. It became something of a second wind for my parents. They seriously thought about it, began to study the issue and collect documents. They didn't care if it was a boy or a girl, but a child. On that exciting day, when they came to watch the children, a barefoot, dirty girl ran out of the orphanage, grabbed both of them by the hands, shouted, "Mom, let's go home!" And my parents' hearts fell in love. It was me, the little girl who met them on the doorstep. My parents vowed to tell me the truth about who I was and where I came from. I still don't know my birth mother, and I don't really want to, because I've really had a good time with them all these years. I received as much warmth, care, and affection as many children from the orphanage did not receive. So we can safely say that I had a happy childhood. Definitely. And then one day, when I came home from school, I found my parents at home. They were sitting in the kitchen whispering, Dad hugging Mom tight, both of them crying and smiling. I didn't understand what was going on. When they saw me, they called me to them, hugged me tightly, and said, "Honey, you're going to have a little brother or sister." They probably expected a different reaction, but I wasn't happy about the news. I immediately imagined the whole nightmare waiting for me. Of course, this is great news for my parents, and maybe if I wasn't adopted, it would have been great news for me too. But no, not for the girl from the orphanage. Not for her. I knew perfectly well that my own child is my own, and I will always remain a stranger. And when the baby is born, they will understand the difference in us. They will feel that this baby is more native to them, which means that I am no longer needed. Will I be returned to the orphanage again? I asked with a terrible voice. My parents protested. Of course, they called it stupid and said that I was their own child. But I understood that it only took time. As the months passed, my mother's belly grew rounder and bigger. Along with it, my anxiety grew in my heart. I stopped being that carefree, cheerful girl, stopped kissing and hugging my parents. I didn't go near my mother's stomach. I didn't listen to it, I didn't talk to it, and I didn't want to touch it at all, because there was a person growing up who would get me out of the house. I knew it and waited. Well, then something happened that should have happened. My father took my mother to the hospital. I was sent to my grandparents. I waited for several annoying hours until finally my father called and said, "Girl, I heard how happy grandfather and grandma were, how they congratulated them, each other, and then they came to kiss me. But I pulled away, locked myself in the bathroom, and cried there for 20 minutes. The next day, my father came to pick me up and said we were going to see my little sister. He reacted to my denials with laughter, translated everything into a joke, then put me in the car and drove away. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the hospital, I was handed an ugly bouquet of flowers, and then my mother came out with a pink envelope in her hands. When she saw me, she began to smile, ran up to me, gave my father's envelope, and began to hug me. I missed her very much, and I was worried, and I only realized it when I hugged her. My eyes filled with tears. And then my father held up the pink envelope in which the little red ball was sleeping with its eyes closed. "Her name is Eliza," my father said. "This is your little sister," he added. The words made me want to throw up. The longer I looked at it, the more I realized that it was the essence of my end, or rather, the end of their love for me. We arrived home, where the four of us stayed, and against our background, I noticed how scrupulous my parents are about every sneeze. They kept running after her. My mother spent 24 hours with her 7 days a week. My father worked, and in the evenings barely had time to eat, take a shower, play with a baby, and passed out. There was no time for me. I belonged to myself, and this thought lived in my head along with a feeling of hatred for my sister. The more she grew, the more my loneliness grew. Looking at my mother's phone, her entire photo gallery was filled with photos of her and mine. Once, twice, and not enough. In general, the first year of Eliza's life was the worst in my life, even worse than in the orphanage, and I told myself that I can't take it anymore. I wrote a note, left it on the table, packed my things, and left the house. My parents thought I went to school as usual, and they didn't even ask me why I had such a big bag. I knew that there was no more room in their hearts for me. That day, I walked where I had to, turned off the phone, and ran around the city. When it got dark, I found a rotten motel, wandered there, and began to think about how to continue to live. Because I did not want to go back to the orphanage, I spent the night there, if you can say so, because I didn't sleep. I didn't eat most of the day, and there was a lump of resentment and unspoken words in my throat. The next morning, I decided to go to a nearby city to get a little lost. I needed to find some work and a permanent bed. But when I was buying tickets, a woman looked at me askance, and a minute later, a policeman came up to me. At the sight of him, I ran towards the subway. I ran as fast as I could, but they caught up with me and grabbed my bag. An angry employee immediately put me in the car and drove me to the police station, where my parents and Eliza rushed in an hour later. I was sitting on the bench, crying, and my mom and dad were saying in both ears that I was a stupid girl. They took me home, interrogated me. My father was mad. My mother was either crying or yelling. It's not clear at all. Then Eliza came up to me with hesitant steps. In the middle of all this fuss, her footsteps seemed so soft. She came clumsily up to me as I sat on the floor, put her arms around my face, and said, "Gloria!" My name! She called my name. Her first word was my name. Gloria. Oh my God, you have no idea how I felt at that moment. My heart sank. My parents fell silent, and I suddenly put my arms around her, and for the first time in her tiny life, I kissed her. Something had changed in me, and I couldn't hate her. My Eliza. Another year has passed since then, and I discussed old grievances with my mom and dad, and I realized that I am still as important to them as before, only now there are more of us in their lives.